I stood there, the birthday card still clutched tightly in my hand as my granddaughter's words echoed in the silence. Don't come to my birthday. The cake, the balloons, all of it seemed to mock me as I realized I'd been shut out of her life, again. So, I made a choice. I sealed her future in my will. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Rain tapped softly against the glass like someone trying not to wake her. Eleanor sat still, legs curled beneath her, one hand wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee she hadn't tasted in over an hour. The sky outside was the color of old bruises, muted purples, heavy grays, pressing against the window of her quiet suburban townhouse. Across the street, a balloon drifted loose from someone's mailbox. Yellow, helium still strong enough to fight gravity. Her phone buzzed on the side table. She stared at it, beat too long before picking up. Claire, she swiped. Hey. Claire's voice was chipper, too careful. Hey, Elle. Just wanted to let you know, Jillian's birthday is this Saturday. A small pulse of hope stirred in Eleanor's chest. Oh? She's keeping it low-key this year, Claire added quickly. Just a few friends from the neighborhood. Nothing big. Eleanor's smile thinned. She could hear the real message tucked between the words. So, no family. There was a pause, just long enough to be honest. Not this time, Claire said. She just wanted to keep it simple. Eleanor nodded even though no one could see her. Got it. Well, wish her a happy birthday for me. I will, Claire said, softer now. You okay? I'm good. They hung up. The silence after the call felt sharper than the rain. Eleanor stared out at the puddles forming in the street, the kids' bikes abandoned in front yards, the mailbox where she used to slip tiny envelopes full of glitter and sugar rush invites. She rose slowly, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled down a weathered white box labeled Birthdays in blocky Sharpie ink. The tape gave way with a brittle crack. Inside, nearly 3 decades of celebration. Photographs curled slightly at the corners. A cake shaped like a ladybug from Jillian's 4th. The handprint painted card from her 7th. Eleanor's face, younger, unlined. Eyes still naive enough to believe mothering was unconditional currency. She sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping slowly through time. In one photo, Jillian grinned, frosting on her nose, arms thrown around Eleanor's neck. Her daughter had insisted on unicorn-themed everything that year, even made Eleanor wear a glitter horn headband. She remembered the way they'd laughed when it snapped in half by the cake. Back then, it had felt unbreakable. Now the silence in the house felt like punishment. Her fingers hovered over a photo from her own 42nd birthday. Jillian had baked the cake herself, chocolate with orange zest. Eleanor could still remember the texture of the icing, the way her daughter had leaned in and whispered, "You're my favorite person on earth." She closed the book gently, like it could still shatter. Back on the couch, she sat in the hush. Rain still falling, mail trucks rolled past. A distant dog barked at nothing. She checked her phone again, but there were no new texts. The empty inbox hit harder than the call. She knew it wasn't just about the party, it was the exclusion. A quiet rewriting of roles. Claire, her sister, now playing gatekeeper to her own child. Somewhere between the court orders, therapy sessions, and 2 years of silence, Eleanor had become optional. Outside, a delivery van idled. The driver walked up Claire's path, across the street, and handed over a square package. Claire opened the door wide, laughing, hair tied up in that way Jillian used to mimic. Eleanor watched as Jillian's voice echoed from the porch, too distant to understand but unmistakably hers. She hadn't seen her in person in almost 9 months. Then Jillian glanced across the street, just for a second. Their eyes met, a flicker of recognition, maybe guilt, maybe nothing. Then the girl turned, disappearing into the house like a shadow. Eleanor stood up, knees stiff, walked slowly back to the box, placed the album inside, closed it. No tears came, not yet. Just the quiet thrum of something ancient and rising, something dense and electric building in her chest. It didn't have a name yet, but it was growing. She put the box back on the shelf and shut the closet. Just as she turned, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Claire, it was Tom, Jillian's father, a number she hadn't seen in over a year. The message preview blinked up at her. "We need to talk face to face, tomorrow." The office smelled like leather and lemon oil, clean, crisp, expensive. Eleanor sat across from Martin in a chair too stiff for comfort, a navy folder resting in her lap like a confession. "I'd like to make a few urgent changes," she said, smoothing the folder's edge with her thumb. Martin glanced up from his screen, reading glasses perched low on his nose. To the will, she nodded. The will, the trust, everything. He took the folder and opened it with the quiet reverence reserved for things that mattered. "Jillian is being removed as beneficiary," Eleanor said, voice steady, effective immediately. "The condo's ownership structure needs to reflect that." Martin blinked. "You're sure?" "I am." He scanned the document quickly, eyes darting line by line. "And the replacement?" Eleanor hesitated. Martin looked up. "Shall we name someone else? A niece? Charity?" "Not just yet," she said. "Let it sit in limbo for now." Martin gave a soft nod and set the folder down. "We'll have to notarize. I'll draw up the revisions by end of day. You'll need to come back to sign." "I'll be here," Eleanor replied. A soft chime sounded from the office intercom, followed by a faint buzz at the building's front door. Martin glanced at the screen. "You expecting company?" "No." Moments later, the office door opened and Denise peeked her head in, coat dusted with rain, holding a pink bakery box. "Hope this isn't a bad time." "Only if you brought bad scones," Eleanor said, trying to smile. "Never." Denise stepped in and set the box down on Martin's desk. "Cranberry orange, and I figured you could use a break. You look like you're about to commit paperwork." Eleanor gave a small laugh. "That's not far off." Martin excused himself to make copies. Denise leaned closer. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice low, eyes scanning Eleanor's face with sisterly suspicion. Eleanor opened her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is for you." Denise raised a brow. "My updated directives. Medical, financial, power of attorney, all of it." Eleanor met her gaze. "Just in case." "In case of what?" "In case life gets complicated again." Denise's expression shifted from playful to careful. "Eleanor, I'm not dying. I'm just getting organized." Denise held the envelope like it might burn her fingers. "You always did clean house when something got under your skin." "I like things clear," Eleanor said softly. Before Denise could respond, there was a knock at the office door. Rory, the teenager from 3 doors down, damp hoodie clinging to his frame, holding a grocery bag like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I found these on your porch," he said, stepping in. Bag split open. "Eggs survived, though." Eleanor smiled gently. "Thank you." He glanced around, curious. "Lawyer stuff?" "Something like that." His eyes fell on the corner of a photo sticking out of Eleanor's tote. An old birthday picture, the edges frayed, Jillian's laugh caught mid-motion. Rory tilted his head. "Is that your daughter?" Eleanor tucked it back in. "Was." He gave a small nod, unsure how to answer that. "Well, I'll leave you to it." "Wait." Eleanor opened the pink bakery box, grabbed a scone, and wrapped it in a napkin. "Here, for the rescue." He grinned, taking it. "Thanks, Ms. Doyle." After he left, the silence fell again, but it felt different now. Sharper, intentional. Martin returned with the new draft documents. "They'll be ready for signature tomorrow," he said, glancing between the women. "Assuming nothing changes overnight." "Nothing will," Eleanor replied. She stood slowly, gathering her things with methodical precision. Outside, the clouds were beginning to thin, the storm tapering off into mist. Denise walked with her to the parking lot. "You sure you're not spiraling?" "I'm done spiraling," Eleanor said. "Now I'm straightening things out. As she buckled her seatbelt, her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Tom again. She let it vibrate twice before answering. "You still good for tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "but not at your place." A pause. "Where then?" She looked out through the windshield at Claire's house across the street, bright with party prep, the faint sound of laughter already drifting through the air. Eleanor's voice was calm and cold. "My place, 10 sharp." The phone lit up on the kitchen counter as Eleanor rinsed her mug, the same one she'd used 3 mornings in a row. No lipstick mark today. She hadn't bothered. The notification glowed. Claire tagged you in a photo. She dried her hands slowly, bone by bone, as if each digit needed permission to function. The image loaded without fanfare. Claire stood beaming in her sun-drenched living room, surrounded by floral streamers and a handful of women Eleanor recognized from the neighborhood. Jillian was front and center, wearing a paper crown and holding a cake. Chocolate 2 layers, the exact kind Eleanor used to make from scratch. There was no trace of Eleanor in the caption, no tag, no mention, just Jillian's Day, grateful for this tribe. Eleanor stared at it for a full 10 seconds, then deleted the notification. No flinch, no save for later, just gone. She walked into the living room and opened the desk drawer. Inside was her old stationery box, cream paper, soft gray envelopes, the kind her mother used to buy in bulk when she still believed handwritten things mattered. She pulled one out and began writing a check to Bridger County Public Library in memory of Dolores Ann Doyle for children's literacy programs. She placed it in the envelope, sealed it tight, and addressed it in careful cursive. Dolores hadn't loved many things, but books had been her religion. It felt like closing a loop. The knock came just as she was placing the envelope by the door. Rory again. Hoodie half-zipped, a folder under one arm and his earbuds dangling from his neck. "Hey, Miss Doyle," he said, stepping in like he always did. Awkward but confident. "Homework?" she asked. He nodded, dropping the folder on her table. "We're doing these family history projects. I picked Irish immigration in the Midwest, 'cause of my grandma, but Mrs. Henley wants us to talk about our own family too. And I kind of suck at personal stuff." Eleanor raised a brow. "And I'm your go-to for dysfunction?" "You've got clarity," he shrugged, grinning. "Plus, you said once that stories are power. I figured maybe I should learn mine right." She studied him for a moment, then stood and walked to the back bookshelf, pulled down a slim, cloth-bound notebook with a red ribbon sticking out the side. "My mother started this. I took it over after she died." She handed it to him. Rory opened the book, eyes scanning the first pages. Names, birthplaces, lines that connected one life to the next. Then he stopped. A branch had been erased, the whiteout clean, no smudges, just an empty space between Eleanor and the generation below. "Is that where your daughter was?" Eleanor didn't look away. "Was." He nodded once, like he understood more than he had a right to. "I guess that's part of the story too, huh?" "Legacy isn't just blood," she said. "It's who you carry forward, who gets remembered." He closed the book gently. "I won't mess it up." "I know." He looked like he wanted to say more, but his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, rolled his eyes, and shoved it in his pocket. "Thanks again, seriously." "Hey, Rory." He paused in the doorway. "If I asked you to help me with something in the next few weeks, something important, you in?" His brows lifted. "Like what?" "I'll let you know." His smile was cautious but solid. "Then yeah, I'm in." She closed the door behind him and stood in the quiet. In the corner of the room, the last helium balloon from Jillian's party floated gently to the floor, its string curling on the hardwood like a question mark. Just then, her landline rang. Only 2 people ever used it now. She picked up. "Eleanor Doyle." "Yes. This is Detective Marshall. I'm following up on a sealed report from 3 years ago. You're still listed as the originating contact. Would you have a few minutes to come in?" Her grip tightened around the receiver. "I do." The HOA board met in the basement of the Presbyterian church on Wednesdays, under humming fluorescence and coffee that tasted like melted shoe polish. Eleanor hadn't attended in 2 years, not since the landscaping debacle with the hydrangeas. But tonight she came early, sat near the front, and waited. Rory's mother arrived late, winded, hair up in a hurried twist, work badge still clipped to her jacket. She scanned the room for a seat, surprised when Eleanor offered the one beside her. "Thanks," she murmured. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I like to keep up with things," Eleanor replied evenly. The meeting dragged. Trash collection updates, noise complaints about fireworks in September. Nothing that mattered. Eleanor sat still, nodding occasionally, listening more to Rory's mother than to the agenda. The way she leaned forward when discussing playground repairs, how she scribbled notes during the budget talk. Afterward, as people shuffled out, Eleanor stood beside her. "Rory's lucky to have you," she said. The woman blinked, wary. "Thank you, he's a good kid." "He is. Bright, observant, underestimated." A pause passed between them, thick with unasked questions. Eleanor didn't offer more, just nodded and walked out into the parking lot, her breath curling in the cooling air. That night, she sat at her desk with a folder of school records she'd quietly pulled. Attendance, GPA, letters from teachers. Rory was more than just a good kid. He was exceptional. The kind of rare, raw potential that usually fell through the cracks in this town. She drafted the paperwork by hand first. A trust, small but meaningful, contingent on graduation, community service, good standing. The name on the title line made her pen hesitate only once. Rory Eldon Westbrook. She didn't call it a scholarship. That would draw attention. She called it a provisional gift trust, and she kept the terms private. The next morning, Denise found her at the kitchen table, papers spread like a chessboard. "You're up early," she said, eyeing the coffee pot. "Plotting?" "Planning," Eleanor replied without looking up. Denise leaned over her shoulder. "Legalese, neat handwriting. You're either leaving someone everything or nothing." "I'm formalizing a shift." Denise reached for one of the pages, then stopped. "You're not giving this to Jillian." "No," Eleanor said. "Not blood this time." Denise raised an eyebrow. "So who?" Eleanor signed one page with deliberate grace. "Presents." That afternoon, Rory found an envelope on his porch. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a note, handwritten on the same cream stationery from Eleanor's drawer. "For when the time comes. Not before, not out of fear. Read it only when you feel the weight shift." Below it, another sealed envelope. No explanation, no instructions, just his name. He stared at it for a long time. Back at her house, Eleanor sat in the notary's office with a single sheet of paper before her. One final line to sign, initials to confirm. The woman across from her looked up. "Want me to read it aloud?" "No need," Eleanor said. She signed. "This is my decision, and my peace." The notary stamped the form. Eleanor folded the paper and slipped it into her own folder, placing it on top of a separate manila envelope marked "Personal." "Do not open until after." Later, as the wind picked up outside and the leaves began to scrape across the sidewalks, Eleanor stood by her window. Claire's house was lit up again. Voices, clinking glasses, the warmth of community on full display. She didn't look away. Her phone buzzed. "Marshall, tomorrow, 11 a.m. Bring any documentation. We'll be recording." She responded simply, "Confirmed." Then she walked to her closet, opened the top shelf, and pulled down a smaller box, cedar, old, and locked. She placed the folder on top of it, then reached into her drawer for the key she hadn't used in 6 years. It was still cold. Eleanor didn't sleep. The morning came dull and slow, sky washed in pale gray like the world itself had faded in the wash. She didn't answer Detective Marshall's follow-up text, didn't reply, didn't confirm. Instead, she stood barefoot in the kitchen, stirring tea that had long gone cold. Then she walked over to the cedar box. The key slid in with a tiny click. The lid lifted on memory like breath from a sealed room. Inside were 3 thick envelopes, one for Jillian, one for Claire, and one left intentionally blank. She pulled out the letter addressed to Jillian, handwritten, 4 pages, measured, honest, heartbreaking. She'd written it 2 summers ago on a July night that had tasted like despair. She sat with it at the kitchen table, read it again. The ending said, "I forgive you if that's still allowed. I loved you more than I knew how to say. I still do." Eleanor exhaled once, soft and final. Then she reached for the shredder. The paper disappeared in inches, slow, deliberate teeth swallowing her forgiveness whole. No ceremony, no second thoughts. Just the mechanical hum of a mother erasing what no longer served her peace. By noon, she was at the courthouse registrar's office. "Need to file a quitclaim deed update," she said, handing over the forms. The clerk looked it over. "You're removing a co-beneficiary?" "Correct." "And replacing with no one." A pause. "Are you sure you don't want to name a backup title holder?" "I'm sure," Eleanor replied. "Let it transfer to the trust when the time comes." The clerk nodded, stamping it. "All right, you're free and clear." It was the word clear that stuck with her. That afternoon, she visited her primary care office. Routine paperwork, polite small talk. At the end, the nurse handed her a laminated sheet. Emergency contact update form. She took the pen without pause and crossed out Jillian's name. In its place, she wrote, Denise Carmichael. Under relationship, she wrote, friend, power of attorney on file. The ink dried as she handed it back. Driving home, she passed the florist. Inside, 2 women laughed while arranging pink roses, the same ones Jillian had brought her after her appendix surgery 6 years ago. Eleanor didn't stop. Back at the house, the shadows were beginning to stretch. She went to the small safe beneath her bed and pulled out a worn folder titled Doyle Final Arrangements. Inside was a printout of her draft obituary, untouched since 2018. She read it once, then crossed out the line. Survived by her daughter, Jillian Doyle, and replaced it with survived by dear friends and those who stayed. She smiled, sad but clean. That evening, Rory knocked once before walking in, carrying a box full of old cassette tapes and notebooks. "You weren't kidding," he said. "You journaled everything." "Almost," she replied. "The important parts, anyway." He set the box down and pulled out an old mini tape recorder. "I can digitize all of this. Might take a few weeks, but I'll do it clean. Lossless." "Lossless," she repeated, amused. "That's a beautiful word for something so mechanical." He pulled out a composition notebook, its spine fraying. "You mind if I read while I scan?" Eleanor tilted her head. "You're the only one who's ever asked." He looked surprised. "Seriously. Claire always said she'd get to them when things settled. Jillian told me she preferred stories with happy endings." "Do yours end happy?" "No," Eleanor said, "but they end honest." Rory opened the first notebook, eyes scanning a few lines before glancing back up. "You've got a strange way of being brave," she smirked. "That's just a polite way of saying I'm difficult." "Nah," he said. "Difficult people usually make the best ghosts." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was sacred. She poured him a glass of lemonade, watched him set up chords and converters with the focus of someone who wanted to understand. Then she rose, walked into the hall, and shut the door behind her. Back in the kitchen, she opened her phone. One unread voicemail, from Marshall. She deleted it without listening. Claire showed up unannounced just after breakfast, wearing athleisure that hadn't seen a gym and a jaw clenched tight enough to crack glass. "I heard," she said, stepping through the door without waiting. "From Martin. He called me, Eleanor." Eleanor didn't offer coffee. She just folded the linen napkin from her lap and placed it beside her empty plate. "Then you already know." "You took Jillian off the deed?" Claire's voice pitched higher than she intended. "And the will?" "I made some changes," Eleanor said calmly. Claire blinked, stunned by the understatement. "Changes? You're not thinking clearly." Eleanor tilted her head. No? No, this isn't just some petty grudge. This is legal. Permanent. You're hurting her. Eleanor walked to the sideboard, opened the second drawer, and pulled out a white envelope. She held it out, level and steady. Claire stared at it. What's that supposed to be? My notarized cognitive and testamentary capacity evaluation, Eleanor said. Conducted last month. Clean bill of mental fitness. Signed, sealed, witnessed. Claire didn't take the envelope. You came here assuming I was confused, Eleanor said. I'm not. Denise appeared from the hallway, drying her hands on a dish towel. That's how you end arguments with paper, she muttered. Eleanor offered her a tight smile. Exactly. Claire flushed, half a dozen emotions moving across her face like storm fronts. God, Eleanor, I don't understand you anymore. That's not a requirement, Eleanor said. Understanding and proximity aren't the same. Claire opened her mouth, then thought better of it. She turned sharply, brushing past Denise on her way out. The front door closed with a hiss. Denise raised an eyebrow. So, that's done. For now, Eleanor said, slipping the envelope back into the drawer. It'll echo. Later that day, Eleanor pulled out the old cedar box again, this time for something less loaded. At the very bottom was a shallow tray lined with tissue. Dozens of dried pressed flowers lay carefully between wax paper sheets, each labeled in her own tiny cursive. April 2007, Dogwood. July 2011, Cosmos. October 2016, Bloodroot. Rory sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, organizing his USB cables. He glanced over. Whoa! Eleanor smiled faintly. Started when Jillian was born. 1 flower for each birthday. 1 for each apology she never gave. 1 for each time I tried not to expect one. He leaned closer, gently holding up a faded yellow bloom. This one looks like it died still screaming. Marigold, she said. It probably did. Rory laughed quietly. Then, without asking, he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo. New art project, he said. Themes memory and decay. This is perfect. Don't tell your teacher I inspired that title. Noted. He got up, disappearing down the hallway, already narrating a voice memo into his phone. His voice bounced off the walls, full of energy Eleanor hadn't seen in her house in years. She sat for a moment longer, the marigold still between her fingers. The chime on her phone pulled her out of it. A new notification. Instagram. Jillian Doyle tagged you in a post. Her body went cold before her mind caught up. She tapped it. There it was, a black and white throwback photo of the two of them. Eleanor's arm around Jillian's shoulders, both of them sun-flushed and wind-blown from the beach. A photo from when things still felt like family. The caption read, Grateful for this woman, always mom, throwback, life before. Dozens of likes, comments pouring in. Aw, you look just like her. Such strong genes. Hope you guys are reconnecting. Eleanor stared at the screen, not angry, not even hurt. Just uneasy, because the timing wasn't accidental. And Jillian didn't do anything without reason. Then her phone buzzed again. New DM from Jillian Doyle. Can we talk? Just us. Eleanor didn't respond to Jillian's message. She didn't block her either. Instead, she did something Jillian wouldn't have predicted. She printed it. The Instagram post, the caption, the black and white photo, even the heart emoji. She printed it on archival paper and slid it into a clear sleeve in her legacy binder, tucked between medical proxies and revised estate terms. A new tab labeled Performances. She labeled the page in pen beneath the photo. August 22nd. Sentimental leverage, public-facing, non-binding. At Rory's suggestion, she'd started the binder 6 months ago. It had grown thicker by the week. Not out of obsession, but organization. Eleanor didn't keep memories. She cataloged patterns. Later that afternoon, she stood in front of her hallway closet, pulling down the old garment bag marked Charity Winter. Inside was a floor-length velvet dress, deep plum, square neckline, vintage stitching still intact. She hadn't worn it since Jillian's graduation dinner, a night that ended with an argument in the car and the word manipulative hurled like a punch. Rory blinked when he saw it. "For the school play?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. "You said they needed period costumes." "Yeah, but wow. This is like museum stuff." "Then it should be seen." He touched the fabric carefully. "You know," he added, "you should have been invited to the birthday thing." "That's cold," Eleanor smiled faintly. "It's not about warmth." "No? It's about pattern." He furrowed his brow. "Like habit?" "Like history," she said. They loaded the dress into a garment bag, and Rory promised to keep it safe, like it was a sacred loan. After he left, Eleanor returned to her desk and dialed Martin. He picked up on the second ring. "Good timing. I was just reviewing the trust clauses." "I want a name added," Eleanor said. There was a pause. "You're reinstating?" "No, I'm adding Jillian to the excluded heirs clause." Martin hesitated. "You're sure?" "She's playing to the crowd again. Let's formalize the boundary." "I'll revise the document today. It'll be ready for signature by Friday." "Make it binding," Eleanor added. "Irrevocable." "That will trigger a legal notice." "I'm counting on it." They hung up. The wind outside had picked up, knocking the leaves sideways in sudden gusts. Eleanor watched a plastic Halloween skeleton twist on Claire's front porch, hanging by one arm, spinning. That night, Rory returned with news. "I won," he said, holding up a thin white ribbon with honorable mention in bold blueprint. "Pressed flower project." Mrs. Henley lost her mind over it. Said it was haunting in the best way. He grinned as he pulled out his phone and showed her the final print. The marigold front and center, petals sharp in grayscale against stark white space. At the bottom corner, his caption read, "Every petal has a silence behind it." Eleanor touched the screen gently. "You titled it." "Yep, I borrowed it from one of your journals." She raised an eyebrow. "Page 27, he said. "You wrote it after your mother died." She looked at him, startled. "You read that far," he shrugged. "I wanted to understand the roots. Not everyone does." Rory hesitated, then pulled something from his bag. An envelope with her name written in his handwriting. "This came today," he said, "from the school, but it had your address." Eleanor took it slowly, flipping it over. No return address, just a Bridger High School stamp. She opened it. Inside was a folded flyer for the fall theater showcase. Her dress, unmistakable, was front and center in the promotional photo, worn by a girl she didn't know. Beneath the flyer was a handwritten note. Donated item, Eleanor Doyle Estate, vintage 1989. Permission to use name for program credits. Eleanor stared at the word estate like it was a mistake. But it wasn't. Someone, likely Jillian, had preemptively listed her donation as part of a memorial archive. A living person labeled as legacy. She folded the paper, sat down, then reached again for the legacy binder. Eleanor played the voicemail at 6:42 a.m., with the kettle whistling low behind her and the house still wrapped in morning quiet. Marshall's voice came through grainy, clipped. "Ms. Doyle, I understand you're not returning calls. I respect that. But I do need you to confirm the authenticity of the report you filed in 2022. Without your input, we may be forced to archive the case as incomplete." "I'll keep the line open for 48 hours. She set the phone down, poured her tea, and didn't respond. Instead, she picked up her own phone and opened the voice memo app, tapped the red circle. "Martin," she said evenly. "Execute all changes. Confirm Friday for signature and filing. Please expedite notification letters. Jillian will receive hers first." She hit send. Outside, the trees were finally shedding what they'd stubbornly held onto all month. Gold and rust-colored leaves spiraled down, blanketing the Doyle yard with a kind of quiet authority. Rory showed up just after 2, balancing a thermos and a brown paper bag that smelled like cinnamon and something homemade. "You feeling soup today?" he asked, grinning. "Or is this more of a vengeance for dessert afternoon?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Depends on the soup." He placed everything down on the counter. Lentil and carrot. Denise said it's what good women eat when the world's on fire. They curled up in the den with bowls in hand and a soft, melancholy documentary on mute. Something about shuttered post offices and the death of letter writing. Rory leaned into the cushions like he'd known them forever. Eleanor watched the screen in silence, her hand occasionally brushing his empty bowl to make sure it didn't spill. Midway through, her phone buzzed again. Claire. Eleanor let it ring out. A minute later, the text came through. Eleanor, please. This has all been a huge misunderstanding. Let's talk. You know, Jillian didn't mean it like that. Denise, who'd wandered in mid-film with a mason jar of peppermint tea, read the message over Eleanor's shoulder. They're starting to smell the fire, she muttered. Singed the edge of their reputation, did you? Eleanor didn't reply to Claire. She simply stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled down a small green shoebox she hadn't touched in decades. Inside, faded envelopes and sun-yellowed snapshots waited like buried evidence. She sorted through them until she found it, a postcard mailed in 1983 from Boston. The front showed a family on a red checkered blanket in the Commons, laughing in perfect Kodak timing. The back was addressed to her in her father's angular hand. E! Your mother says this was what love used to look like. Thought you might like a copy. Dad. No signature, no warmth. Just documentation of nostalgia, stamped and postmarked like proof of life. That night, Eleanor slipped the postcard into a white envelope and left it on Rory's backpack. When he found it the next morning, he opened it at the bus stop, stared at the image, then flipped it over. He read the back twice, then again. Inside, she'd added a single handwritten note. This is what family looked like then. Let's build something else. Across town, Jillian opened her mailbox and pulled out a thick white envelope. The Doyle Estate letterhead in the corner, her name on the front in sharp black ink. Inside, 3 pages. An executed copy of the excluded heir notification, a copy of the updated irrevocable trust amendment, a final line, handwritten in ink she knew too well. This decision is not a punishment. It is a pattern, acknowledged. She stood in her driveway holding the papers as if they might go up in flames. She turned slowly toward Claire's front door and knocked. Eleanor watched from behind the curtain, the fabric cool between her fingers, the breath in her chest barely rising. Jillian stood on the porch in a navy coat Eleanor hadn't seen before. Sleek, expensive, too polished for Bridger in October. She held a bouquet. White lilies, a poor choice. Funereal. She didn't knock. Not yet. Just stood there, looking down at the flowers like she was considering their meaning, or rehearsing. Eleanor didn't move. Inside the house, the silence was a cathedral. Jillian took a step closer, lifted her hand toward the doorbell, then lowered it. After a long minute, she bent down and placed the bouquet on the welcome mat. Her fingers lingered on the paper ribbon before she stood, glanced once at the window, not at Eleanor, just toward, and walked away. Eleanor stayed behind the curtain until the sound of the car door, the soft rev of the engine, and the disappearance of red taillights were gone. Only then did she let go of the fabric. She didn't open the door, didn't touch the flowers, just sat back down at the table and stared at the tea she'd forgotten to finish. Rory came by around 3, backpack slung low, headphones half tucked into his hoodie. He kicked off his shoes like he'd lived there his whole life. There's a bouquet on your porch, he said, dropping his bag. I saw. You want me to toss it? Leave it. He tilted his head, studying her. You're allowed to not forgive. Eleanor turned to look at him. Forgiveness isn't inheritance. He blinked. Whoa, okay. I mean, she clarified. Just because someone says they're sorry, or pretends to, that doesn't entitle them to the pieces of me I've spent years protecting. Rory sat quietly for a moment, then nodded. My dad used to think forgiveness meant we started over, like nothing happened. But starting over with someone who never started with you, he shrugged. Feels fake. Eleanor's voice softened. That's because it is. He left a bowl of soup in the fridge, labeled in Sharpie. In case of mood swings, she laughed. He didn't try to make her open the door. That night, Eleanor returned to her cedar box for the last time. Inside, she pulled out the envelope labeled Rory Final. It had been sealed for weeks, but tonight she reopened it, unfolded the letter, and replaced the last 2 paragraphs with new ones in her clean, deliberate handwriting. You weren't born into this family, and that's what makes your presence mean more. Blood gave me grief. You gave me choice. You will inherit the things that matter, because you saw them while I was still here. She resealed it, marked the corner with the date, and placed it on top of the legacy binder. The next morning, she called Martin. He answered immediately. "Eleanor, I was just about to follow up." "Lock it," she said. "File everything. No more revisions." "You're certain?" "I've never been more." "I'll process the irrevocable lock and initiate final notice. Jillian's legal counsel may try to challenge. They'll lose." A pause on the line. "Consider it done." She hung up and stood, looking at the porch through the front window. The bouquet was still there. One lily had fallen sideways, its pale petal brushing the edge of the doormat. She thought about the word peace, then decided closure was more accurate. That evening, she and Denise watched the sky split open over Bridger. A sudden storm, rain like poured glass. "You're not going to open it?" Denise asked, nodding toward the flowers. "No." "She's going to spin that story into a sympathy parade." "I know. And you're okay being the villain in her version." Eleanor looked outside again. "I've been the villain in Jillian's story for a long time," she said. "I just finally agreed with her." Lightning cracked. Power flickered once. In the hallway, Rory's digitized audio transfer chimed from the living room speakers, Eleanor's voice from an old cassette. People like to call it love when they want to be forgiven for harm, but real love doesn't cost you your memory of what happened. Denise looked at her. "You knew that even back then?" Eleanor smiled. "I just hadn't acted on it yet." On Monday morning, Eleanor stood at the kitchen counter with 2 large manila envelopes and her best handwriting pen. She wasn't shaking, but she was deliberate. Each letter printed in clean block capitals, each corner of the return label pressed perfectly flat. To Jillian M. Doyle. To Claire E. Halberd. Inside each envelope was the same thing. A single-page cover sheet from the Doyle estate binder, stamped and notarized. No accompanying note, no flourish, just the facts. Beneath the header, in bold font, current legal beneficiaries of the Eleanor Doyle Trust and Estate. Jillian's name was not there. Claire's either. Eleanor sealed both envelopes and pressed the flap down with the side of her palm like she was flattening something final. Then she walked them out to the mailbox. No ceremony, no hesitation. She slipped them inside, raised the flag, and went back in. She didn't look back. Rory came by after school, still in paint-splattered jeans from art class, and pulled a small square frame from his backpack. "Thought you'd want to see it," he said, holding it up. Inside, the honorable mention ribbon from the Flower Project, mounted behind glass, with the caption printed below in crisp serif type. Every petal has a silence behind it. Eleanor stared at it a long time. "You framed it." "You gave it weight," Rory said. "I just gave it walls." He placed it on the end table near the couch, facing the hallway where the pressed flower notebook lived. "That's where it belongs," she said. Later, Denise arrived carrying a battered cardboard box full of high school yearbooks, the covers warped slightly with age, and the smell of basement storage clinging to the pages. "I figured we could burn some time," she said. "Or memories." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "We're allowed to laugh in Act 3. "Hell yes," Denise said. "Especially when we've made it this far without collapsing." They cracked open the first book and were immediately drowning in shoulder pads, braces, and eyeliner decisions no one should have approved. By the third photo spread, they were crying with laughter, Eleanor wheezing so hard she had to wipe her eyes with a dish rag. Rory walked in and looked mildly alarmed. "Did someone die?" "Only our dignity," Denise said, holding up a photo of Eleanor in a sequined dress and spiral perm, mid-sprint in the powder puff relay. I ran anchor, Eleanor said proudly. I'm framing this next, Rory said. The laughter settled into something soft and steady. Eleanor leaned back, her cane resting beside her chair, untouched for the last hour. Her knees weren't what they used to be, but the pain today was manageable, and the company made everything else lighter. She walked Rory out just after dusk, slower than usual, but with purpose. As they stepped onto the porch, her eyes caught the mailbox flag, lowered. They're gone, she said softly. The envelopes? Picked up an hour ago, Rory looked over at her. You okay? Eleanor nodded. Better than okay. You don't regret it? Truth doesn't ask for regret, she said. It just asks for consistency. He didn't press. Inside, she returned to the binder, opened to the final tab, notifications sent, and checked off both names in her neat, slanted script. Then she closed it. Just as she clicked off the desk lamp, her phone buzzed once. A number she didn't recognize. She let it ring out, then checked the voicemail. Jillian's voice came through, tight and measured. I got your document. I see what you're doing. You always needed an audience for your control. You think this ends things, but you forget family isn't always bound by legalese. Sometimes it's bound by what you bury. Eleanor didn't listen to the rest. She deleted the message, then opened a new tab in her binder. Subject: Implied threats. Date: October 30th. Source: Voicemail, Jillian Doyle. She picked up her pen and wrote, "Let her try." By noon, Martin had sent the final confirmation. Subject: Estate execution. Finalized. All changes recorded. Disbursement sealed. Lock applied. The trust is now closed and active. No further edits will be permitted under law. MR. Eleanor read the email once, then again. The weight of finality didn't land like she thought it would. It didn't crush her. It steadied her. She opened her laptop and moved the email to a folder labeled Completion. Not closure, not resolution, just a single word that meant done. Across town, Jillian walked into Martin's office unannounced. She wore red lipstick and a coat meant for autumn fundraisers, not for reckoning. I'm here to discuss the trust, she said. The receptionist, a young woman with sharp glasses and softer eyes, stood with practiced empathy. Do you have an appointment? I'm her daughter, Jillian replied. I don't need one. The receptionist checked her screen, then tilted her head. I'm sorry, the trust is sealed? No further appointments are being accepted. Jillian stiffened. That's not how this works. I'm afraid it is. Martin never came out. He didn't have to. Jillian stood there long enough for the air to turn awkward. Then she turned, heels tapping with clipped defiance against the tile floor as she left. The receptionist waited until the door shut before slipping a copy of Eleanor's capacity evaluation into the shred bin. Claire, predictably, panicked. She didn't call Eleanor, she called Denise. This has gotten out of control, Claire said. We just need to sit down and talk, like sisters. Denise let out a short laugh. Claire, I don't think you and Eleanor have spoken like sisters since the Clinton administration. You're not helping. I'm not trying to, Denise said. You're 30 years too late and too branded to change your scent now. Claire exhaled, sharp. Jillian was emotional. She didn't mean to frame things the way she did. Maybe not, but she meant to frame them, Denise said. And now that the canvas burned, you're both mad the painting's gone. The line went quiet. Denise didn't call back. That afternoon, Rory brought his mic, a laptop, and a small collapsible tripod. I've been digitizing interviews, he said, for my final project. Want to read something? Eleanor tilted her head. Like what? Your favorite poem. Doesn't have to be long. Just something that sounds like you. She thought about it, then stood and disappeared into the hallway. She returned with a book so worn, its spine no longer resisted. Inside was a dog-eared page from Jane Kenyon. She didn't need to read it to remember it, but she opened it anyway. She sat down, adjusted the mic, and began. Otherwise, I might never have heard the robins this morning. Their song a thin, liquid silver poured into air. Rory watched her the whole time, not just listening, but watching, like he was storing the sound of her breath between each word. When she finished, he hit stop. "That was perfect," he said quietly. She nodded once. "Can you send me the file?" she asked. He emailed it to her on the spot. Eleanor moved it into her digital folder marked Legacy, Audio, then backed it up to a flash drive labeled in her handwriting, "For when the house is silent." As the sun dipped low, golden light casting a long shadow through the living room, Eleanor stood slowly and walked to the window. The porch was clear, the mailbox empty. The line had held, and tomorrow the world would continue, but it would do so without her permission being assumed. She looked down at her hands, older now, thinner, but steady. There was no bouquet on the mat this time. No voicemail waiting to be played. Just the faint echo of her own voice, reading about birds that only sing in quiet. They admitted Eleanor on a Thursday. The intake nurse gently explained the protocol. "Just for observation. You're stable. We're just making sure it stays that way." Eleanor nodded, unbothered. She brought her own robe, a crossword book, and the flash drive Rory had labeled for legacy only. The hospital smelled like over-bleached floors and plastic privacy curtains, but her room had a window. That was enough. By the next morning, Rory was there, backpack over one shoulder, a tote bag of sliced pears and shortbread cookies under the other. "I told them I was your grandson," he said, setting the bag on the tray table. No one questioned it. Eleanor smiled. "That's because you didn't flinch." He pulled out her crossword book. Page 67, always. That afternoon, Denise came in like she'd never left, with coffee from outside the hospital and dry shampoo. She fluffed Eleanor's pillow and complained about the parking situation like she had a right to. They rotated without schedule, but never overlapped. Eleanor had company every day. On the third evening, the room phone rang. Rory answered before Eleanor could reach for it. "Hello?" Claire's voice was thin, like she was trying to sound small. "I'd like to speak to my sister." "She's not receiving visitors." "I'm not a visitor." "Then you should have acted like family," Rory said, and hung up. He didn't mention the call to Eleanor, but she could tell. His hand lingered a second too long on hers when he left that night. The next morning, a nurse brought in a large envelope with no return address, postmarked from Bridger. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Jillian's. Eleanor didn't touch it. She nodded toward the bottom drawer of the nightstand. "You can file it." The nurse placed it inside without a word. That afternoon, she asked to bring her the mic again. "I want to record something," she said. He hesitated. "Now?" "While I still sound like myself." He set up the tripod and adjusted the angle of the mic so it wouldn't catch the IV beep. Eleanor shifted in bed and pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. Then she cleared her throat and began, eyes open but looking nowhere in particular. "If you're hearing this, I've already said everything I needed to say aloud, but I wanted to leave one more thing. Thank you, not for fixing me, not for replacing anything. Thank you for knocking when others closed the door, for choosing to stay, even when the weather got sharp and strange, for seeing my boundaries as a form of love, not punishment." She paused. "That's all. The rest is paper." Rory hit stop. He didn't speak. He just turned the mic off, packed it slowly, and set the memory card into its hard case. Before he left that night, Eleanor handed him a small manila envelope sealed in wax. His name written on the front in her now familiar script. "What's this?" "Give it to Martin tomorrow," he looked at her. "This is the last amendment," she said. "It needs to be filed while I'm still in the room." He nodded. "Consider it done." That night, Denise brought a lavender-scented lotion and rubbed Eleanor's hands as the monitors beeped quietly in the background. They didn't speak. Not everything needed words. Outside, Bridger's wind howled low against the windows, carrying the first hint of November's cold. Back at Martin's office the next morning, Rory stood across from the desk, envelope in hand. Martin opened it, read the single page inside, then glanced up with a rare softness in his expression. "She's precise," he said. "She's Eleanor," Rory replied. Martin reached for the stamp. Eleanor Doyle passed just after 4 a.m. The nurse said it was peaceful. No machine screaming, no last gasp. Just a long exhale and a stillness that never reversed. Denise arrived an hour later with her coffee half full and her voice caught behind her ribs. She didn't cry, not immediately. Instead, she sat by the bed, took Eleanor's hand in hers, and said, "Well, you did it your way." By mid-morning, Martin had activated the directives. He read the will aloud 2 days later in a quiet room with only 4 people present: Rory, Denise, himself, and a legal witness with a clipboard and a tight bun. "There are no contested claims," Martin began. "No conditions unmet. All assets are legally bound and distributed per the final amendment." He opened the folder. "To Rory Eldon Westbrook," he read, "I leave full ownership of the property at 106 Linden Drive, all remaining funds from the Designated Education Trust, and the legacy binder in its entirety." Rory didn't speak, just stared at the floor like it had started speaking a new language. "To Denise Carmichael," Martin continued, "I leave the contents of the cedar box, one personal fund account to be used at her discretion, and the installation of a garden bench at Bridger Commons bearing the inscription, 'To the one who sat beside me, even when the weather turned.'" Denise laughed softly under her breath. She remembered the damn bench. Martin turned the page. "To the Bridger County Public Library," he read, "I leave the full remaining balance of my charitable estate allocation, under the name Gillian M. Doyle, in honor of all the things she chose not to read." Denise's eyebrow lifted. Spicy even in death. Martin didn't blink. He folded the papers and passed each envelope to the named recipient. "No mention of Claire," Rory asked quietly. Martin shook his head. "Nor Gillian. Not in name, not in legacy." The funeral was private, as instructed. Invitation only. Rory designed the program. A black and white image of Eleanor at age 30, holding a book and smiling like she'd just remembered something worth keeping. The service was held in the side chapel at the Presbyterian Church, where the HOA used to meet, and where Eleanor once called someone out for suggesting the hydrangeas were too aggressive. Denise gave a eulogy full of sharp love and mid-sentence laughter. Rory played the audio of Eleanor's recorded poem, letting her voice echo through the wood-beamed ceiling. There were no hymns, just stories. And then Gillian arrived. Late, no RSVP, wearing a sleek black dress and sunglasses too large for the room. Claire trailed behind her, more fragile in posture than anyone remembered. Gillian made her way toward the front, but paused when she saw the printed program on the entry table. Her name wasn't listed, not under family, not under speakers, not even an in memoriam, just the clean curated truth of who had mattered in the end. She stared at it for a long time. Claire reached for her elbow, whispering something soft and desperate. Gillian pulled away. "She erased me," she said, more to herself than anyone. Rory, standing nearby with his hands clasped behind his back, turned toward her. "No," he said gently. "You just ran out of chances to be written in." Denise didn't offer a seat. Neither did anyone else. Gillian stood in the back as the service moved on without her. Claire sat 2 rows behind the last guest, clutching a folded tissue that never touched her face. Afterward, people drifted out in quiet pairs. Rory stayed behind to collect the extra programs. Denise waited beside him, her hand on the back of the pew like she was anchoring something invisible. Gillian walked out alone, her heels echoing down the stone hallway like punctuation marks in the wrong sentence. The rain held off until dusk. Then, suddenly, it didn't. 2 weeks after the funeral, Rory stood in front of the Bridger County Public Library with a toolbox in one hand and a plaque in the other. The bench had already been installed, facing the main lawn, under the same oak tree where Eleanor once read aloud to neighborhood kids in the late 90s. Rory used his sleeve to wipe down the wood before carefully affixing the bronze plaque with 4 rust-proof screws. It read, "In memory of Eleanor Doyle." Who remembered, he stepped back, studied it. Not too grand, not too small, just right. Inside the library, a quiet display stood beneath the stained glass, the Doyle gift. A full shelf of books selected by Eleanor, many annotated in the margins, some first editions, and a framed note beneath them that read, "Donated in the name of the one who stopped reading but never stopped knowing." J.M. Doyle. Rory read it once, then turned away. That Saturday, Denise opened her house to the neighborhood. An informal tea, no RSVP required. She laid out lemon bars, herbal infusions, and a stack of Eleanor's journals, bookmarked with pastel sticky notes. "This one's from 1996, she said, flipping to a marked page. She wrote, "Love without boundaries is just performance art. Good lighting, but no substance." The neighbors nodded, chuckled. A few took photos of the pages. Rory passed around mugs and plates, while Denise read excerpts aloud. Nothing cruel, nothing too raw. Just the kind of truths Eleanor had never softened, but always meant. Down the street, Claire sat on her patio, watching the cars parked along Denise's lawn. Her phone rang twice before she picked up. "Martin," she said quickly, "I think we need to revisit the distribution terms. There's precedent, emotional distress, damaged expectations." Martin's voice cut in. "Claire, I'm going to stop you there. I'm just saying, no." His tone was colder than she'd ever heard it. Eleanor made herself clear. She left nothing to interpretation, and I won't assist in any attempt to exploit that clarity. Claire's throat tightened. "You don't think this has been difficult for us?" "I think," Martin said flatly, "Eleanor spent years warning you what the end would look like. You just didn't believe the end would come." He hung up before she could reply. The following week, Jillian appeared at the law firm unannounced, again. "I'm pursuing an emotional distress claim," she told the young associate at reception. "There was an active effort to humiliate me through legacy designations. That's legally punishable." The associate, a recent law school graduate with one eyebrow raised nearly to her hairline, nodded slowly. "You're suing the deceased. I'm contesting her intent," which was what she stated repeatedly. Under witness and seal, Jillian bristled. "Intent can be manipulated." A voice from the hallway cut in, one of the senior partners, amused and loud enough for the entire reception to hear. "So can memory, but it usually makes a poor plaintiff." The room fell into quiet chuckles. Jillian turned on her heel, rage stiffening her spine. The door closed behind her with a too loud click. Meanwhile, the Doyle estate completed its final filings. No delays, no disputes, not a single document left unsigned or contested. Martin emailed Rory the confirmation. Subject: estate closed, final approval. All distributions completed. No pending actions. Rory forwarded it to Denise with a single line. She got it exactly how she wanted. Later that evening, Rory visited the library again. The bench was empty. He sat down with a book in his lap, Collected Poems by Jane Kenyon, and read aloud to no one in particular. A breeze moved through the oak leaves above. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, and Rory smiled, quiet and still. Across town, Jillian scrolled Eleanor's archived donation list online. Every book bore her name. Every one of them a reminder that you can be mentioned and still not be remembered. She closed the tab, but the name remained. Rory held the brooch in his hand for a long time before the ceremony. It was Eleanor's, an antique gold circle etched with forget-me-nots. She used to pin it to her coat on days she needed extra resolve, or to make the room behave, she'd once told him, smirking. Now it lived inside the silk lining of his graduation case, nestled between his tassel and transcript, invisible but exactly where it needed to be. He walked across the stage that afternoon with his chin up and his spine straight, the brooch pressing lightly against the inside of the case as the dean handed him his diploma. He didn't trip, didn't rush, and when his name echoed through the auditorium, he swore he felt a breeze brush past his ear, warm, amused, approving. He smiled and didn't look back. Back in her apartment, Jillian sat alone on the couch, scrolling. Her feed was full of mortarboards and wide smiles, friends' kids, neighbors' nieces, even one of her old high school rivals, her daughter walking across a similar stage. Photos poured in with hashtags like Warts Proud Mom and Akokwatse We Were There and Arkwatse Legacy. Nobody tagged her. Nobody asked where she was. She scrolled faster, harder, until the screen blurred. Then she tossed her phone face down on the floor and stared at the wall, her chest too tight for crying. Across town, Claire moved slowly through her hallway with a half-empty glass of wine. She stopped at the framed photo near the linen closet. Her mother, smiling politely, posed on a park bench in late summer sun. She studied the frame for a moment. Then quietly, she lifted it from the wall. She didn't throw it, didn't weep, just walked to the storage closet and placed it on the top shelf, behind an old table runner and a broken curling iron. She closed the door, nothing shattered, nothing shifted, but the hallway looked different without it. That same weekend, Denise stood behind a podium in a multi-purpose room at the Bridger Commons Community Center. She wore Eleanor's old navy blazer, the one with the missing button and the ink stain on the cuff, and addressed a circle of folding chairs filled with seniors and volunteers. Eleanor used to say that how you end a thing tells the truth about how you lived it, Denise began. A few people nodded. Someone took a sip of lukewarm tea. We spend our whole lives imagining we'll have time to fix it later. But eventually, you run out of laters, so you either show up or you leave someone else holding your absence. She paused, letting that land. We choose our endings by how we show up. Afterward, people came up to her with handshakes and soft stories. One woman brought a bag of pressed flowers to donate to the library's memorial wall. Denise promised to take them there herself. On Monday morning, Rory stood by Eleanor's bench with a small envelope in his hand. Inside, a birthday card. Not his, hers. It was blank inside, except for one sentence in his handwriting. I hope today is quiet, and that the wind remembers your name. He tucked it beneath the bench, wrapped in a weatherproof sleeve, then sat for a while with his coffee, watching people come and go. Some sat, some didn't. But the bench remained, unmoved and present. Rory stayed until the sky turned the color of ash. Then he stood, smiled to himself, and walked home. 3 weeks later, someone found Eleanor's last unsent journal tucked inside the back of the cedar box. It was mostly blank, just a few pages written in ink that had faded from blue to gray. The final entry read, "My granddaughter once said, 'Don't come to my birthday.' So I blew out her future in my will. Not out of revenge, out of recognition. There's no candle for erasure, but there is silence. And I've made peace with that flame.